So Sonic Frontiers just released, and it is such a huge step up in the Sonic franchise, though it's kind of hard not to be when you're following forces. But not only is this game somewhat of a return to form for 3D Sonic, but it's also a Sonic game unlike any we've ever seen before. The Sonic team has finally done away with the boost formula, and now has the blue hedgehog running around at the speed of sound in open world areas. And though this game does have a few flaws and certainly isn't perfect, it is still pretty solid, and it does a great job at laying the groundwork for future Sonic titles. So with all that out of the way, let's roll the intro and get into my review of Sonic Frontiers. Now before we get into the review itself, I just want to mention that this is for the PS5 version of the game, meaning that anything I talk about that's graphics, performance, or loading time related, it's all for that version, and it doesn't necessarily speak for the other forms of Sonic Frontiers, though if I had to guess, it's probably very similar to that of the Xbox Series X. Now with that in mind, the first thing I would like to talk about with Sonic Frontiers is that the graphics are absolutely incredible, at least once again on this version of the game. Being the first Sonic game to release on a next-gen console, there is a huge jump in graphical quality and fidelity from the previous Sonic games. Sometimes it's even difficult to tell whether a cutscene is pre-rendered or being rendered in real time with the game, and most of the time it's the latter because the day-night cycle of the game is reflected in those cutscenes. The game has two graphical modes you can choose between, being 4K mode and 60 FPS mode, and though the game is set to 4K mode by default, I suggest as soon as you get the game to go into settings and switch it over to 60 FPS mode. That's what I did, and I was getting the buttery smooth picture of 60 FPS without any apparent drop in resolution. I don't know why this is, but if I had to guess, I'm assuming the game is still technically running in 4K. It's just probably using a dynamic resolution, that way if it needs more performance power, it can drop it a little bit in order to give it a little more of an edge. Overall, the 60 FPS mode also is incredibly solid, and I haven't noticed any drop frames. Though this might be because the game has a severe pop-in issue, and this doesn't affect gameplay at all, but it does make it so the game is a lot less immersive, which really is a shame. If you don't know what pop-in is, it's basically when objects around the map only render when they're super close to the player, rather than when the player is approaching them from far away. Apparently this is a problem with the Hedgehog engine itself because it was designed for the smaller Sonic levels of past games. However, I do wish the developers went in and patched this out before release. There is still hope that they'll fix this in a future update, but because it's a problem with the engine itself, I do doubt it. Other than that small hiccup, however, the game does run beautifully. Loading screens are also so fast they're almost non-existent, though that is to be expected from next-gen consoles. However, if you are playing on another console that's not next-gen, then you'll be happy to know that during the loading screens, there are little tutorials you can play in. You can either do the thing the tutorial is asking you to, or you can just mess around in the tutorial area and try racking up some combos on the little red crystal that it gives you to attack. Now before I start talking about the gameplay of Sonic Frontiers, I first want to quickly mention the music. The soundtrack of Sonic Frontiers is pretty different than a lot of other Sonic games, and that's mainly because it has so much variety. The overworld themes are mainly piano-based, and sound almost like a more robust version of the ambient themes found in Breath of the Wild. The cyberspace levels also sound a lot more electronic, which fits given the context of what the cyberspace levels are in the story, which we will get to in the gameplay section of the video. And the boss fights are mainly metal-based, which really contributes to the epicness of feeling like you're supersonic and you're taking down these colossal titans. However, if you've been watching the channel for a decent amount of time, you'll know I love jazz, and there is one song in this soundtrack that sticks out to me so much. It is by far the jazziest in the whole theme, and it's one of the minigame themes, being SOS Backup. I've had it playing in the background of this portion of the video, and I mean, just listen to it. It is so jazzy. It's a shame that they didn't record this with live instruments and instead decided to use MIDI, but even so, this song is an absolute bop. But now that I'm done talking about the music of this game, let's move on to the gameplay itself, which is actually really solid. Now, there will be some extremely minor story spoilers in this portion of the video, but nothing you couldn't really derive from the trailers. I'm going to make sure to not say any big reveals or story aspects at all, just enough to explain some of the gameplay tropes. So if you want an entirely spoiler-free experience with this game, which I doubt you would be this far in the video if you did, then you can click away now. Are you still here? Great. Now let's get to talking about the gameplay. And like I just mentioned, to explain the overall gameplay loop, I need to explain some of the minor story aspects. The gist of it is, Sonic, Amy, and Tails have all traveled to the Starfall Islands because they've detected that the Chaos Emeralds have traveled there. Upon entering these Starfall Islands, they are all sucked into a realm called cyberspace, which is the digital dimension. Sonic is the only one who can find his way entirely out, and Amy and Tails are stuck halfway between the real world and cyberspace. In order to free them, Sonic must collect all the Chaos Emeralds to become Super Sonic and defeat the Titan on each of the islands. To get the Chaos Emeralds, some of them are unlocked by side quests and minigames that progress the story, while others you unlock by getting enough keys from cyberspace levels. And to get into the cyberspace levels, you need to defeat the mini-bosses around the map, which give you gears that allow you to unlock them. It does sound kind of complicated at first, but the way the game presents it makes it really easy to understand while you're playing it. The Starfall Islands themselves are these massive areas that you get to explore, which is the open world aspect of the game. On these islands are of course the mini-bosses I mentioned before, which are each really unique and incredibly fun to fight. But there are also regular enemies and multiple challenges thrown around the map as well. Some of these challenges are platforming based, which will typically grant you rings and some tokens that you can use to talk to the characters trapped in cyberspace. Others are ones that unlock different portions of the map for you to see, which are typically either puzzles or speed-based challenges, similar to the towers in Breath of the Wild, which you'll see this game has a lot of similarities to. And speaking of similarities to Breath of the Wild, this game's Coco are remarkably similar to the Koroks in Breath of the Wild. The Coco are small creatures strewn about the Starfall Islands that you can collect and then bring to Elder Coco for him to either increase your ring capacity or your speed. Also, in some of the challenges I mentioned earlier, in addition to their regular rewards, you can either earn red seeds of power or blue seeds of defense, which you can exchange to Hermit Coco to either increase your power or your defense. These ways of leveling up Sonic really encourage you to explore the islands and all the things available to do on them, though there are other ways to level him up as well. I am of course talking about the skill tree, which actually isn't focused on increasing Sonic's speed or defense, but rather giving him new moves in combat, which by the way, Sonic's combat system has been entirely revamped for this game. By defeating enemies or exploring different parts of the islands, you're able to rack up skill points, which you can use towards skill tree items. The skill tree is in no way extremely complex, though the moves it does give Sonic are really helpful in some of the boss battles and just in normal combat. And they feel really nice to use with Sonic's new movement system, which has been completely revamped as well. Unlike in past games like Sonic Forces, where you could just not even touch the analog stick during a level and just jump a few times and still clear it, Sonic Frontiers gives you so much more control over Sonic. And though this can make him feel a little bit slow at times, it also unlocks a lot of the full potential of his speed, allowing for some crazy skips and some really cool tech with his movement. Not only is this so much fun to use in the vast open worlds of the Starfall Islands, but also in the more confined areas of the cyberspace levels. The cyberspace levels themselves are sets of remakes and reimaginings of past Sonic levels. Some are completely the same for the entire level design, while other ones just take inspiration from these past levels with the theming and have completely new level designs. Both of these forms of cyberspace levels are so much fun to go through with Sonic's new movement options, and you always feel like you could have gone a little bit faster if you master some kind of crazy tech, which is the exact feeling a momentum-based platformer should give you. You can always go a little faster, and it gives this game so much more replayability. Even if you 100% the entire game, you can go back into levels and just try to beat your high scores. There's a mix of 2D and 3D cyberspace levels, and the 2D controls feel just as nice as the 3D ones. And these levels are so much fun to play through, especially for people who like the original 2D Sonic games. I personally prefer these 2D controls than those of the classic Sonic games, because it doesn't take you as long to get your speed back up, and it also feels so much more fluid and less based entirely on momentum. You feel like you have more control over how fast your character is going. Though I still haven't talked about the main new movement option Sonic has gotten, which is sadly restricted to the open world and not in cyberspace levels, though I can kind of see why. And that movement option is Psyloop. Psyloop allows you to leave a trail behind Sonic, and you can loop around enemies with it. If you connect it into a circle, then it will damage any enemies within it. And if you do it around anything that's not an enemy, you can either solve puzzles or sometimes just earn some rings and other collectibles. Now, at first glance, this might seem like it would be a little bit finicky, with you having to connect the two ends of the circle. But the way the Psyloop actually works, with you not having to connect the circle necessarily at the ends, as well as the way the camera moves during the Psyloop process, makes it really easy to do, and it's super satisfying to pull off. The Psyloop also has its own fun little Easter egg that's actually incredibly useful. If you draw an infinity symbol on the ground with the Psyloop, then you get infinite boost for the next few minutes. And this is actually really useful because the boost meter, though it does refill extremely quickly, is kind of annoying to make sure it doesn't completely deplete. And speaking of the boost, it has been nerfed a fair amount from past games, which honestly I am so glad that they have done this. In past games, if you use the boost, you could just mow through tons of enemies without ever having to actually fight them, and it took away so much of the challenge. But in Sonic Frontiers, the boost still makes you go at really high speeds, but it also makes it so you can't actually damage enemies with it, meaning you have to actually engage in combat, which is once again even more satisfying than ever with this new combat system. I will say the Psyloop is used as a little bit of a crutch by the game, making it so pretty much any situation, if you use the Psyloop, it becomes easier, and the Psyloop is really going to be your go-to move for pretty much the entire game. Thankfully, it's a really fun mechanic, but it still does feel like it's a little bit overused. But that's just my opinion. If you've picked up the game already and you just want to see what my opinion is on it, then make sure to tell me down in the comments below if you think that the Psyloop is overused or I'm just completely crazy. I genuinely do want to know what you guys' opinions are. I'd also like to talk about how this game's boss fights are so cinematic. I'm not going to show a boss fight itself just for spoiler reasons, but I will show the introduction you get to the first boss of the game, which is towards the beginning of the game. All these different changes in camera angles really contribute to the fact that you are not doing any damage to this thing until you have the Chaos Emeralds. And you are still in control of Sonic during this time, when you're homing attacking this boss. This isn't a cutscene. There is, however, a cutscene that follows that really drives this home. Sonic is puny compared to these giant titans, and you need the Chaos Emeralds. The storytelling in this game is absolutely amazing through its cinematography, which is really incredible given that Sonic typically doesn't do really well when it tries to focus on story. Sonic 06. Seriously though, this game feels so much more grand than pretty much any other past Sonic title. Again, another similarity to Breath of the Wild. You have this entire grand land to explore, and it's all up to you to stop this insurmountable threat. This game, in my opinion, takes a lot of the best aspects of Breath of the Wild and applies them perfectly to a Sonic game, still having that core Sonic DNA. But while this game does have so much to offer in terms of grand scale, before we end off this review, I want to talk about some of the small moments that really give this game so much of its charm and make it so much fun. One of these things is the fishing minigame. There are purple coins spread throughout the islands that you're able to collect, and you can exchange them for the ability to fish with Biggs the Cat. When you catch different things, you can get different tokens from Biggs, which you can then spend in Biggs' shop. But what's really fun is just the core fishing minigame. It's kind of a bit of calm in the storm of all the action and speed going on in the rest of the game. And it's so nice to have that little bit of calm moment where you can just take a breather, take in the scenery, and just kind of be within this world. And not all these small moments even have to be calm. What I think makes a really good game is if its world and movement system are good enough to be able to just make your own fun within the world, not following the story, not doing any side quests, just going around the world and making your own fun. I had an experience like this actually while I was recording gameplay for this. I went to the top of a tower in the middle of the map because there was a Chaos Emerald there, and then I realized I didn't have enough keys. So I jumped off the tower and I landed on top of a squid, which is one of the game's mini bosses. And though it's not that hard to fight, it is still so much fun. So I fought it, and after that, after all of that fast-paced, high-action fighting, I ended up landing right in front of a fishing spot for a bit of calm. And though this was entirely coincidental, the fact that this can happen in the game is what makes it so magical. It's hard to describe moments like these in video games if you haven't experienced one yourself, but they are such magical and precious moments, and if a game is able to do that, then in my book, it's pretty darn good. So while Sonic Frontiers is certainly not a perfect game, its innovation on the core Sonic formula has really done the series so much good, and I hope that this becomes the foundation for future Sonic games. The magic that it's able to provide as just being sort of a basis for the future of Sonic is incredible, and I am very much looking forward to the future games that build off of this. That's why I'm rating Sonic Frontiers a 9 out of 10. Some people might say it deserves a worse rating, some people might say it deserves a perfect score, but I think 9 out of 10 is perfect for this game, simply because of how much fun this game can provide. Because at the end of the day, games really aren't about graphical quality, fidelity, the resolution, or the frame rate. It's about the experience it provides, the fun you're able to have with it. That's why so many older games are still fun to this day, even in their simplicity. And Sonic Frontiers, though it is certainly not really a simple game, can still provide that same level of fun. And the magical moments it can provide are on par with games such as Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, even if some aspects of the game certainly aren't. But what do you all think? Do you want SEGA to make an entire side game based on just the fishing minigame from Sonic Frontiers? That actually is not a bad idea. I kind of want that now. Well, let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video. If you got this far, you probably liked it. And if you want to see more reviews and just videos like this in general, then why don't you subscribe? It supports the channel and you guys get notified whenever I upload more videos like this. With all that out of the way, thank you all for watching. I'm Jacob with the Game Block, signing off.